All right. Welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be joining you today after, I guess, over a week off. I was sick and we had a death in the family. My dog got injured. So a lot going on. So psyched to have Mike Oles, good friend, great strategist, Democratic organizer joining us. Say, Mike, how you doing today?
Great. Great to be with you, Hal. And it's a little cold, -6 degrees this morning up here in the Indianapolis metro, but it's warming up to 18 a little bit later. So we're excited about the heat burst.
Well, you stole my thunder, Mike, because I was going to say we're frigid here in like 18, 19 degrees last night. You were 20 degrees colder there in the heartland. So, I mean, what do you do? Do you bring the cows into the house? I mean, what's the strategy to keep warm?
Yeah, it's sort of like I look out. Every night when my garage doors close, I feel like I'm on the planet Hoth right now. Where in Star Wars, where you're closing down for the night, hoping that Han Solo makes it in, because it is. It looks like that we're out here right now, but yeah, no cows. My sister has a couple goats. One a tauntaun, like in Star Wars, but no farm animals to worry about, thank God. But my cat is somehow escaped outside and being a real jerk. So I'm not sure what she's up to, but we're gonna try to wrangle her back inside.
I'll tell you, you worry about the animals. My dog curls up into a ball. I got the heat going. Sometimes she goes over and nestles near the heater, but other times she stays away from it. So I don't know what she's thinking. She'll go outside and stand there in that, double digit, 10, 15 degree cold, and doesn't seem to mind it, but I know she's shivering. So you don't know what the animals are thinking half the time.
Yeah. Is the Rock Creek frozen right now? Do you have a little of you can do a little bit of ice skating in the Rock Creek over there in Maryland?
You know what? I spent pretty much all day yesterday in my house. I was watching football games and taking care of the dog again and making
yesterday
some
was
meals.
was a crazy football game. My fantasy team, for those who care, we had a bye week, thank God, because all the other teams, all the really bad teams did great, and all the good teams did bad yesterday in our fantasy league. But obviously, the end of the Kansas City Pat Mahomes Super Bowl era yesterday, and my team was led by Phillip Rivers and should have won, and they scored too quickly at the end of the game. That was their biggest problem. So congrats to those in their 40s, especially Phillip Rivers today. And hopefully our Indianapolis Colts make a nice little run here at the end of the season.
Yeah, we'll talk a little sports with Mike. Then we're getting into the strategery. It was a violent weekend. I don't want to lose sight of that either. It was really a rough weekend, Mike. But just real quick on the sports. Yeah, last winter, this winter, actually, William and I, my younger son, got a chance to go out to Indianapolis and watch a Hoosiers basketball game with Mike. It was a lot of fun. I think you guys pulled it out at the end, right? I can't remember because I went to a lot of games. I know Michigan State beat us.
Yeah, it was one of like sort of the, Mike Woodson, Coach Mike Woodson's his last sort of game where people were over him after that game. But the Terps won on that day.
That's right. Terps won at the end, turnaround jumper. And just quickly, sorry to just talk over you, but it was the opposite when Michigan State came to not Colt. It used to be Colt Fieldhouse. Now I think it's the Infinity Center. I can't remember, on the campus. And they beat us on a last second half court heave. So kind of turnabout is fair play there.
Yeah, but and just one more shout out, one more sports reference. I know we have a somber topic today, and global violence and really gun violence, but I do want to give the Indiana Hoosiers football team, right, played in the Rose Bowl January 1st, number one in the country. We have the Heisman Trophy winner. So really hell has frozen over here in Indiana, not just with this weather, but the losing list. 60 Minutes said last night that the losing list football team in college football is now number one in the country. So hey, things change, right? Things can change on a dime.
It's very exciting, and hopefully,
Coach Signetti.
And I know your reference to changing times is also kind of a hopeful, I think, with respect to our political situation as well. Yeah, really rough weekend. I call it a weekend horribilis. So we'll start with Providence, Rhode Island, and Brown University, where, by the way, my niece lives just a few blocks from the campus there. She teaches on campus, although not at Brown, but at a school that's on the campus there. And they were sheltering in place, really scary, all the lights off in their neighborhood. They still haven't caught the shooter either, Mike.
Hey, Hal, it's, and I know news break yesterday about Australia also and violence. And, here in the United States, what I find troubling is that the president of the United States was almost assassinated on live TV in front of the nation with, maybe with a millimeter more accuracy. He is assassinated. That Charlie Kirk, the right-wing hero, was assassinated on live TV. And if that doesn't wake up the conservative cause about the dangers of guns, that their two main leaders can be assassinated, and that gun violence is a threat to everybody, not just school children and college students and innocent people, but is a threat literally to the most powerful people in the United States, including the CEO of a healthcare company. Right? We know that we have a major problem in the United States, and I think that problem though really starts with the Republican Party and the folks who are who have don't really care about the First Amendment, but have literally said it's more important to protect the Second Amendment than anything else, including the lives of their most powerful leaders. It's kind of a weird spot to be in because I'm somebody who studied a lot of nonviolence in college and in movement building and social justice work, and so I just don't understand. What I don't understand is that these guns are so powerful, so dangerous. Anybody can get them, especially here in Indiana, where our open market gun laws have created a crisis, unlike any other major cities, and also in Chicago where there is strict gun laws, they just go 15 minutes across the border in Indiana and get a hold of guns pretty easily. So it's just. Yeah, it's sad, and I don't know what to do, Hal, because it's my wife's birthday was yesterday, December 14th. It was the anniversary of Sandy Hook yesterday, also, and so Hal, what do you do when common sense is sacrificed on this idolatry of guns and this fake idea that somehow guns protect us and protect our democracy?
Yeah, it's very, very upsetting. We're all, look, I worry. My wife goes to an elementary school, and we know schools are often targeted. It's very scary. And you mentioned Chicago. The high murder rate in Chicago is often pointed to by gun enthusiasts, gun advocates, gun nuts, as I would refer to them, as an argument against strict gun control. Well, look at Chicago. They have those strict laws. But as you very aptly pointed out, you drive 15 minutes across the state line into Indiana, and nobody's stopping you when you come back with your trunk full of weapons. Or you drive up, I don't know what they call that highway that goes up to Mississippi, but I think it's, excuse me, I got a little sore throat.
I-55 or I-57, depending on where you're going, yeah. Don't
they call that like a gun trafficker's route or something right there up from Mississippi and the South? So you need a national gun law, but and you point to the Republicans, obviously they're the bigger problem, but are the Democrats missing an opportunity here to use this issue to their political advantage? Do you feel that they correctly recognize that they're going to lose if they make guns the issue, or is it that they too are compromised by the NRA and by a very well-funded lobby?
Yeah, I guess I'm not as familiar. I mean, on that front of how the NRA and the gun lobby interacts with Democrats. I know, most people I know are sick of these gun deaths and sick of random violence. I mean, how the next town over, about 3 miles away from me, there was a Latina immigrant who was there to clean somebody's house. She may or may not have walked on the wrong door, and she got murdered at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Monday morning to start the work week. And the owner there is talking stand your ground, like basically now, according to this legal theory, that you can if somebody shows up on your door and is confused and is accidentally trying to unlock the wrong door, you can shoot them and stand your ground at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. And so I don't know how you probably don't know this answer better than I do, but it feels like the Democrats I hang out with would do whatever it takes to try to get something done, and try to work across the aisle, but it just doesn't seem to work. And what can you do when your number one apologist Charlie Kirk and your number one leader Donald J. Trump almost get dies on air, which is a sickening photo, and another one is we were there on a Sunday afternoon having family dinner, and when the news came out about Trump's assassination, right? Like, to me, that'd be a wake up call that something's really screwed up. But it's obviously doesn't matter to them. Even Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump or to MAGA can be sacrificed to the next to the gun gods. But you tell me, what do you think?
Well, I really, this is an area where, I'm the first person to blame the Democratic Party for everything that's wrong. I mean, I sort of view the Republicans as just this monolithic evil, and that the need is to fight them, and that we don't have a powerful or staunch or uncorrupt Democratic Party. So I always point my finger at the Democrats. That said, I really don't have a good answer to this. Bernie Sanders, both of you and I are both Bernie bros, right? I mean, we love Bernie, we supported Bernie, and the one concession I made in 2016 to the Hillary bots was, yeah, she's better on guns. Bernie was not great on guns, and he was from a gun-owning state, Vermont, and he had kind of made a deal, to get elected with the NRA. But in general, I would say this is an issue I can't really point my finger at the Democrats, except to question you whether you think this is an issue they could be making some hay out of politically. I don't know, because I don't feel like that they are using it aggressively when most Americans do want at least stricter laws when it comes to background checks, when it comes to those high density cartridge, the things you plug into your semi-automatic that has the rounds in it. I forget what the word is for that, but people want stricter laws. They don't say you shouldn't be able to get a gun, but you should have to jump through a few more hoops, and there should be more protection. I don't hear the Democrats making that case as strongly as I would like, but I may be missing it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I would say I was, just kind of, just had me thinking about this history lesson. I've been reading this book, When the Clock Broke, which is about politics of the 1990s. The last year, New York Times had it as one of its notable books of the year, and I've been, man, such a slow reader. All this internet browsing has killed my book reading, and but this book is really fascinating because it talks about the 1990s, and I just read the chapter about Idaho and Ruby Ridge, and if you remember this story, there's a man who becomes a survivalist extremist, white nationalist, moves out to Idaho, and is ultimately involved with a gunfight with FBI agents, and forgetting this guy's name, right? If you can look it up real quick, but his in his case, it was sort of like the ultimate case of the 90s, right? That this was a sheer case of government overreach and FBI thuggery and ineptitude, and this man, actually ends up not going to jail, and is given a huge government settlement, and his son and his neighbors and his wife maybe were killed during this attack or this FBI raid. What I found interesting about it as I was reading the story, though, this guy, you know who I'm talking about? What's this guy's name?
I don't. I'm sorry. this is history lesson for me.
But what was interesting is that his backstory is fascinating because he's a vet who is in Iowa, and he ends up working at a John Deere factory in Iowa during the farm crisis and during mass layoffs and industrialization in Iowa during the farm crisis. And then instead of discovering progressive politics and multi racial social justice solidarity organizing that brings people together to fight the real enemy here, which is corporate greed and environmental destruction and deindustrialization, he discovers apocalyptic Christian politics and white nationalism, and then ends up out in Idaho. And so when I think about where the Democrats screwed up, it really goes back to the when it comes to violence and when it comes to our national story, is that we failed to during the 90s and since then our politics have been pretty weak and not connecting with working class voters, especially in the heartland here. And this is the consequences that we have instead of discovering progressive politics and how we can actually make a difference in the world, these people have discovered apocalyptic Christian identity and nationalism, and instead of and they're waiting for the return of Jesus almost. So it's so when I think about where the Democrats fail, it's really we failed to build a powerful working class movement and gave that away to neoliberalism.
Well, I totally agree with that. And you have been in the forefront of trying to change that dynamic and reaching out on behalf of working with you, Mike Oles, that is, working with progressive Democrats, economic justice Democrats, as I would call them, and on issues that relate to wealth and income redistribution down. So I know that's your fight. I totally respect it. And I hope we see some successes going forward. I did show, Mike, just to put a bow around the gun issue, that was Randy Weaver, I believe you were referring to. Yes, is Randy that right?
Weaver, yep.
Yeah, I looked it up. It didn't come to me. I Googled that real quick. I think it was From Ruby Ridge to Something was the book.
And what's interesting, Waterloo, Iowa, the GM plant there. And I don't know if did you ever go out to Iowa when we were working the Bernie campaign in 2020?
No.
But we were, but we spent a lot of time in Waterloo and with the John Deere workers there. So basically 2 decades earlier, during the farm crisis, if there had been a Bernie Sanders movement that had, Randy Weaver might not have ended up down that rabbit hole, but maybe had, he would have become a progressive organizer and helped rebuild the Democratic Party in a meaningful way. So who knows, right? But progressive politics and progressive organizing really needs to be everywhere and all the time, or people will end up down these pretty dangerous and bad rabbit holes.
Well, they provide a certain community for folks who don't really have alternative options of places to go where people care about them. We really live in this kind of winner-take-all, rapacious crony capitalism where people are basically on their own. And if you're on your own and you're scared and you don't have any place that's going to, that you can go to, you find sometimes very extreme groups to join. I brought up the Australian shooting. I'm going to talk more about that later in the week, Mike. It's very interesting. This was a Chabad that was targeted. A lot of people are crying anti-Semitism. That may be part of it. I'm going to address that later in the week. That's not what I really want to focus on with you, but just the fact that in response to this mass shooting, Australia is already talking about stricter gun laws, and they had enacted back in the 90s, 20 years ago, much stricter laws regarding automatic and semi-automatic weapons, which greatly reduced the number of mass shootings in Australia. It's much rarer there than here. Even still, with this one incident, the parliament is gathering to make it tougher for folks to get these weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, I mean, right, the United States is the only place where you have multiple mass shootings a year, it seems like, right? Or, I mean, it seems like a common sense gun. The quote, modern Democrats, right? It's a common sense gun solution. Let's let's get the most dangerous guns off the streets. They can do the most damage.
All right, I do want to talk Democratic strategery with Democratic strategist. I think it's just strategist, but we'll play along with the game here. Mike, big win there in Hoosier land. And what do you see? You're the Hoosier state, right? In the Hoosier state there. And you were part of this. One of your allies or buddies in the state house joined with Republicans to defeat a Trump gerrymandering scheme. So tell us about what happened and any lessons that we can take from it.
Look, I mean, I'm pretty surprised, to be honest, that this was that the Indiana State House, really the Indiana State Senate, came through the way they did, because it's the first time in recent memory that there's been something that has been this exciting and bold that's happened in the Indiana State House. And normally it's just bad news after bad news, and hopefully some wins that you get are defensive wins, or the policy is so extreme and unpopular that it goes quietly and it dies off far away. So I mean, I think a couple of things. One is Indiana is already a really gerrymandered state. Excuse me.
Yeah, we're all sick, man. We're all getting it. Yeah, it's really bad out there.
It's 72 state house, so so we have very gerrymandered state. Our state house is even more gerrymandered. We have super minorities in both the Senate and the House. So really, there's two things going on here. One is just the moral climate is against increased gerrymandering. Already was a ridiculously gerrymandered state, and so the polls were strongly against this, and so I think that means for something. The resistance to fighting this, there was fierce resistance from the this has been going on for about 6 months. The resistance worked well, and I know resistance is kind of a weird word in our world, but the uprising against redistricting made a huge difference, and I was there several times. And the first day that J.D. Vance was at the Indiana State House, the protesters were being so polite. I mean, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. And then the Republicans had like 40 dorks on the other side of the state house, just waiting for J.D. Vance to show up so they could kiss his ass or whatever. And we had thousands of people. They had 40. And I'm like, guys, why don't we all go over here where the action's at, where J.D. is going to be at, and try to run him out of the state house, right? And then he had a fundraiser around the corner that afternoon. They raised a couple $1 million for the Republican Party. And so I went over, and as J.D. Vance is there in a secret meeting, closed door. He won't talk to the press, won't talk to the public. I try to start knocking on the door, say, hey, let us in. We want to talk to the vice president also. And cops come over, get yelled at. They don't want to arrest anybody because they'll just add to the news. And I should have pushed my luck that day and got arrested, but it was. But just the state house was flooded. Popular opinion was against it. But then, gerrymander, you can only, there's, football, right? There's bend but don't break, right? And this could have been a bend and break situation where as the Afton Bain race in Tennessee a couple weeks ago showed that, I think she increased 13 points. And that's after the Republican Party spent $5 million on a campaign that should have been a $100,000 campaign for him. So they're radically unpopular. Trump's policy is radically unpopular. People don't want to sacrifice seats when it's already gerrymandered, and the breakage and the dam could break.
Right. So just let me jump in for a sec. We'll talk about Afton Ben in a little bit. I'm glad you mentioned her. That was a really interesting race, which I've commented on. I thought this was a really interesting story as well. Was there a concern, do you think? I mean, if you're a state, if you're a Congress member, even, you may be worried, as you mentioned, if you cut the pie too narrowly, you may lose, right? I mean, if the Democrats become more popular, if there's a swing, Indiana has shown it will vote Democratic. It did for Barack Obama in 2008, for example. So there is that worry. Do you think also, though, the bare-knuckled strategy or tactics where they threatened to withhold funds to Indiana, the attacks? There apparently was a Republican who got swatted where the police were called based on a false report of a crime in his house. It was kind of scary for him, I think. Do you think that may have actually rebounded against or boomeranged against the National Party?
Look, I think there's a lot of carrots and sticks, and the carrots were not working because they invited, every Republican in Indiana was invited to the White House a million times this summer. J.D. Vance made a couple trips to Indiana to the State House, right? So all the carrots didn't move the needle, and then the threats themselves just got worse and worse and worse. And yeah, there's political violence. Sorry, trying to stop my coffee from breaking out, but there was real political violence where people were swatted and threats were made, and then Trump himself, when he he called, he used some pretty awful language describing people with mental disabilities, and one of the Republicans said, yeah, after Trump said that about basically his own child, he was voting no, and so what I do think though is that the votes in the Republican Senate in Indiana were never there, right? They and I think Rod Bray, the Senate president, tried to tell them, we don't have the votes. Our caucus does not have the votes, and when they voted, a majority of this Republican caucus and all the Democrats voted against redistricting. So, in the end, the State House, you normally don't vote on anything unless you don't have the votes. You don't have a hearing unless you have the votes. You don't do anything unless you're. And so that's the first time I've seen it where a decision this big, they had a whole special session essentially about it, even though they knew they didn't have the votes to win. So, yeah, I think the threats and all that didn't work, but I think part of his Trump's magic is, he's been a force of nature in American politics, but he's a clown and a liar and a thief and a bad actor, but I think that spell is wearing off, hopefully, and hopefully that's the biggest sign here.
Well, I was looking for a lesson out of this or a moral, and I think the moral that you just gave me is stand up to this guy. The Democrats, to the extent that they have given in, have made a terrible strategic error. Unless they're going to get something very tangible, very clear cut in response to compromising with Trump, they just shouldn't do it. And his response, his over-the-top reactions, his unhinged attacks actually hurt him when he doesn't get what he wants. And so Democrats have failed, to fight back hard enough, and it seems clear to me.
Look, I think it's, and I think now as we look at, 2026, the affordability message is what this is going to be fought over, right? But there's two versions of that, right? There's the real affordability message. Well, look, I make good money. We have a nice house. We're raising 3 kids, about to go to college. Life is expensive as hell right now. And the Republicans have made it worse. And so how do the Democrats combat that? And I think that's where, that's where we got to land our punches. But it can't just be, well, we want more subsidies for health insurance companies, right? Or we want more tax breaks and tax codes and this and that, which was which the Biden folks did, which is they took a very simple proposition. We need universal clean energy, and we need to make it cheap, and we need to rebuild industry by having a giant and growing clean energy sector. It turned it into this weird tax abatement driven tax policy conversation that then ends up getting routed once Trump takes over. And so so I think when we think about affordability, it's more like, let's get universal health care, let's get Medicare for all family. That is the party, right? Let's clean energy is cheap energy. Let's get that done. Trump is out here pushing these data centers and these land grabs, and and these are going to soak up all of our water, drive up energy prices, fry the planet. Right? That's a Republican scheme, but I heard in Maryland they have the same issues we have in Indiana. So this we have to be the party of anti-data centers, and we have to be the party of protecting our water, and we have to be the party of healthcare, and we got to fight for things, and in Indiana, there is this, what I found interesting, on Friday they had the vote in the Senate. On Wednesday and Thursday, there's 3 or 4 data center meetings across the state. In South Bend, Indiana, New Carlisle, Indiana, which is a Republican stronghold outside of the Democratic stronghold of South Bend. There's a hearing till 4:00 in the morning where the county commission votes no against a data center, a massive data center. The night before in Michigan City, LaPorte County, one of these counties that voted for Obama twice and then for Trump, huge turnout against another data center where the Democratic city council actually betrayed the progressives there. In Indianapolis, massive turnouts against data centers. So it's like, let's get our act together and let's fight for the future we all believe in, and that's popular. Like you said, the polling shows that our issues are popular, from gun control to universal health care to protecting the environment, to clean energy. So what are we waiting for?
Is the answer to the question you just posed, Mike, what are we waiting for? Is it a green light or a wink and a nod from the CEO of Goldman Sachs and the president of Raytheon? I mean, I'm just trying to, because this is something that Brianna Joy Gray said on her podcast, and I actually quoted it, is we're getting sick on the left. And I put myself, to the left of you even, although I don't know if on policy we really are to the left. I think we both want the same things. Maybe we see strategy, what can work a little differently. But she said she's sick of hearing we just need to work harder, we need to get out in the streets, we need to fight harder, because we've already convinced the American public. They're already with us. We shouldn't be funding Israel. We should have universal single-payer health coverage, as you pointed out. We should have smarter gun laws. We shouldn't have the data centers. We shouldn't be giving in to big tech. And yet, it seems like, to the extent the Democratic Party is fighting on our side on any of these issues, they're fighting with one arm tied behind their back. And I think that's what's so frustrating for so many people.
And how, I know sometimes we probably differ on the possibility of what's possible in the Democratic Party, but here in Indiana, we're going to make a run for it, where in the middle of the bluest county, where we have Indianapolis, where we have a outdated, broken down Democratic leadership that, when Bernie Sanders was here helping us save the Carrier factory, they wouldn't show up on the same stage as Bernie Sanders. They literally, hid from Bernie Sanders while he was in town multiple times, 5 or 6 times it happened. These guys, and then these guys go out and have sexual harassment scandals. They're, they only care about developers' interests. They don't care about, protecting open spaces and parks, and they don't care about, the things they can do to make our healthcare better, which, so we're going to try to run those Democrats out of office next year. I think we're on the verge of, between this year and next year, and this one blue dot here in Indiana, where the neoliberals and the party loyalists control things, but they're on the verge of collapse. Our goal is to run them out of office, and, we're going to have some exciting campaigns. We're going to have countywide electeds for the first time be truly progressive, and hopefully the mayor of Indianapolis will be a true progressive next year in 2027. Awesome. With a,
I think it's easier to do. You know what's funny about that?
And Donnie is the Heartland a little bit, but these people have failed us, and they're loyalists, and they care more about protecting their little fiefdoms than actually winning the broader fight in war. And so I think that's our work as progressives is like, let's use this upcoming primary season to take over as many seats as possible, and then let's take out MAGA in 2026 and 2027 and 2028.
Couple quick thoughts on that. I think sometimes it may be easier to turn around a Democratic Party in a red state than in a blue state. So if you look at Maryland, you look at Massachusetts, I think both of which obviously are trifecta states, but also states with veto-proof majority of Democrats in their state houses, and they're very corrupt. And when I say corrupt, I'm not saying necessarily they're taking money on the floor of the House, but they will do what the corporate lobbyists want, and we're seeing that. I think it may be easier sometimes to turn around in states where the lobbyists are a little less concerned because they see the Republicans as their path to power and to legislation that benefits them. So let's hope that Indiana turns it around, and then you take power and you.
Right, and Gavin Newsom's the perfect example of that. Right,
Right.
He's positioned himself through the presidential candidate, and what's hilarious to me is that in Indiana about 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, we got rid of net metering for solar panels. So basically, we destroyed a very small homeowner-owned solar panel industry to sacrifice it for the utility companies so they could have gigantic farm systems of solar panels that would create wealth for them and create debt for homeowners. And I was like, Indiana was such a small piece of the puzzle, but they're like, yeah, this is just the start. They're using Indiana as the example, and then once they get the language figured out, and what they said is that only rich people can afford solar panels, and they're actually hurting poor people because poor people can't afford. So they use this weird logic on us, got it through the state house, and then 10 years later, California, led by Gavin Newsom, is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's awful.
And so you're exactly right when it comes to when it comes to these neoliberal Democrats, it's in a place like Maryland or California, right? It's a problem, and that's where us progressives, we got to figure it out somehow, right? And
I'm sorry. I'm sorry you got that cough. I feel bad, and thanks for coming on.
But the independents in Nebraska that are running, or places where independents can win, I think that's great strategy, and I think that if you're a Democrat in a deep red district and an independent is running, get off the ballot and help support the independent.
100%.
If you're in a blue state or like in Montgomery County, in Maryland, what do? You got to but I do think people are sick and tired of the hypocrisy and the inaction, and maybe it's this data center issue. It could be something that brings people out in new leadership. And
yeah, that's what Carlos says. Carlos Childs, another organizer in Maryland. He's really leading the fight here on data centers. So that's a really important fight, no question. He believes that's a unifying issue as well. Sounds like you do too, Mike. Real quick, just want to ask folks, if you're watching us live, and I see folks both on YouTube and Facebook, you can give us a call. I'll take your call, 240-242-5646. The phone number's right there on the screen. Haven't said in a while, so I forgot it. 240-242-5646. Would love to take a call for strategist Mike Oles. Mike, with regard, and I want to get to Tennessee, and I also want to talk about Jasmine Crockett for a moment and maybe get into the Pine Tree State as well, which is Maine. But real quick, do you think that Democrats should take a lead from the Republicans in Indiana, Democrats in blue states like Illinois, Maryland, and not gerrymander further their districts? It looks like J.B. Pritzker says he's monitoring what Indiana is doing. He's taking it into account. He doesn't say he's not going to try to push through a new scheme in Illinois to add one or two congressional Democratic seats. Likewise, Wes Moore here in Maryland, who is under a lot of fire from the left, but I can't say I disagree with him trying to push for one more Democratic seat here in the Free State. What do you think?
It's a great question, because it would seem hypocritical to be like, okay, Illinois, Maryland, Virginia, let's flip the table here and go full blast gerrymandering. And I'm not quite sure what the national numbers are saying right now in terms of who's up or minus on gerrymandered seats, but I think the Republicans are still up some after Missouri and Texas. And so I would say, I think ultimately we should all try to push for bipartisan redistricting commissions and try to get out of the gerrymandering game. So that should be our ultimate goal. But in this moment, I mean, I was glad to see what California did after what Texas did. It's if Ohio, yeah. So it's a great question. I would say let's see what the data says, and if Republicans are still up 10, 15 seats because of gerrymandering, let's go. But if it's closer than that, let's really try to push for universal, a constitutional amendment or something to redistricting, because it just sucks to live in a gerrymandered place. I mean, and in either way, right?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, on balance, I'm glad Indiana, of course, is preserving, especially Andre Carson's seat, who's pretty darn good, especially for a red state Democrat, I believe, and he's been pretty outspoken against Israel, which I greatly appreciate compared to many other Democrats. So that was a nice little bonus, a nice little advantage from this. But in the end, I do think there's a true existential threat to our, I won't even call it a democracy, but to the extent we still have some representative government here, that's really under threat if Trump maintains Congress going forward. So seems a little bit hypocritical, but I hate to say it, there sort of is a bigger picture there that we have to look at. I think that's where you are too.
Yeah, exactly. But I do want to say, like, at a very local perspective, I live in the most purple, probably one of the most purple state house districts now in the country. The Democrat, this has always been a Republican state house district, General Assembly, and we lost by 50 votes last year by 0.001%. And we should have won. The fact of living in a purple district means that our Republican representative who voted no against redistricting, who comes out of sort of the cool, I hate to say this, but she comes out of the batshit crazy part of the Republican Party. That probably started out as an extremist beyond extremist, and now she is the most moderate, most respectful, most, if you have an issue with you, and it kind of comes to corporate power, she's on our side most times, and now she acts like she can't do much because she's in the Republican Party, right? But so that's how the difference is between having a purple district where you have to compete for votes versus having a deep red vote district where it's an either red or blue, right? You really have to work hard at keeping your constituents happy, and so it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a nice story. I agree. Purple districts are better, and I like multi-member districts as well, so that sizable minorities can get representation as well, even if there's a coherent block of 52% who like one particular candidate or one particular party. I do want to move to Tennessee real quick. You were definitely involved. You were in, I believe, Nashville when this election was happening. And I actually want to be very targeted in my questioning because I reviewed a lot of information about Afton Ben before and after the election. And one thing I noticed is that she definitely campaigned as an economic populist. The Nation, through Nichols, John Nichols, did a really nice write-up of her, describing her, progressive policies on health care and affordability issues. The Republicans completely ignored all that. They hearkened back to statements she had made 4 or 5 years ago during the Black Lives Matter movement, and they attacked her consistently on identity issues. So what does that tell you? And am I right? Is that right? Was that your sense on the ground?
Bain is one of my favorite people of all time. I met her way back, when we were working together, and the Republicans ran a video against her as for getting thrown out of the Tennessee State House. And look at this crazy lady. She's getting thrown out of the State House. She's wild. And she was getting thrown out because the Speaker of the Tennessee House, right, seated a convicted child molester, brought him back to the Tennessee to the Tennessee state government after being convicted of some horrendous child abuse claims, and so that's why she was getting kicked out, and they used that against her, and I was with Afton on election day, and Afton is like a true populist, right? Is not consultant driven, is not trying to. As race get closer and closer, you see this a lot of times. The populism goes away, and the the nuanced corporate Democrat comes up, right? And she never left that. And this is a tricky district because it includes, a chunk of downtown Nashville, and then includes, counties, from the Kentucky border down to the Alabama border, all to the west of Nashville. It's a pretty rural spots, right? And when we were at the party where hopefully she was going to claim victory, right? At 42% of the vote comes in, she's leading. 42% of the vote in, and you're like, wow, this might be really possible, right? And then the lead slips away across the night. But it was powerful to be there when the Democratic Party was united behind the progressive for the first time, right? And the populist, and there were a couple thousand people at that gathering, and I spent the time down in Williamson County that day, doing some last minute door knocking and outreach, and that the Williamson County is sort of where a lot of the country music stars live and the superstars live, and we actually went out to Leiford's Fork, which is a beautiful area full of the lead of country music and elsewhere, and it was a lot quieter and somber down there, and so I'm thinking, well, how do you actually get the votes to win this race? And it's like, we've got to find a way to organize in rural areas if we're going to try to win these districts. How do we break the siege on the mind of rural Americans? Because Afton Bain, everything she stood for is everything those people probably want in their lives, right? Affordable, universal health care, thriving communities, good schools, right? Cheaper groceries, and obviously she did a lot of connecting, but not enough to flip the tide. And so, what does that look like? If you have enough time and enough energy, and then, just to put a bow on it, though, it's the Republican Party spent so much money on that race that should have been a shoo-in for them, that was designed for them, that it was, it took an army, a nation of millions to hold us back, right? That's exactly kind of what happened there. But yet we still didn't win. So how do we win? That's the big question. And I think people like Afton can help us get there. If we don't give up and walk away, but if we go out into Dixon County or Dirksen County and some of these other counties and on these school campuses, how do we get really, really organized and united?
Well, I mean, a couple thoughts come to my mind, and you can swat them down or agree. It was a really tough district. It was a district that was drawn to be solidly Republican. It was designed to draw away some black voters in Nashville, as you mentioned, put them in a district where they would be overwhelmed by rural whites, so that their votes would be, basically just, wasted in state elections, or at least in district-wide elections. So that's part of it. And I would say, and I don't like to, and I made this point before, I think in those kinds of districts, you just have to be pure populist. We saw Bernie go into West Virginia and draw big crowds, and he's really associated just with populism. They were able to come up with clips and videos. I'm not saying she was wrong to participate in Black Lives Matter. I'm not saying that was a mistake from a moral standpoint or a justice standpoint, but it just isn't going to play well in majority rural white districts. And that's just something that I guess you just have to accept.
West Virginia. I was there with Bernie in West Virginia at the back in August. And it was one of the really coolest Bernie events I've ever been to, because it was in this gymnasium out in coal country, Hatfield McCoy country, basically, right down the street from there. And it was real. But then afterwards, there was a lady protest. There's only one protester, this nice old lady protesting us. And so we tried to have a conversation with her and try to see like what's her real deal. And there was like so many levels of brainwashing, I guess, that this woman could just throw back at us. And we couldn't break her. We couldn't, like our common sense love of humanity and solidarity, right? We couldn't get her to move, like so we just gave up and walked away because, but so that's my thing is like, how do we, and I'll say this is that, there was a quote that Afton had about how quote unquote she hates Nashville unquote, and what she was talking about is just sort of the, Nashville when I was growing up there. Like one of my favorite trips as a kid is that we took both my grandmothers to Nashville. My one grandmother just a huge country music fan, and she grew up on a farm in Indiana, like rural misery kind of type of place, and my grandmother, who says that she almost dated Frank Sinatra, who grew up in New Jersey, which is, I don't believe her, right? But she says she was this close to dating Frank Sinatra. They went to Nashville and had this fantastic weekend in 1980s Nashville, and went to the couple shows and museums, and now that Nashville has been gentrified, right? Working class artists and musicians are priced out of Nashville. It's become this sort of Austin of the Middle South, and an alternative to Los Angeles because it's cheaper and the weather is not too bad, and it's become this other place that didn't exist when Afton was a teenager, probably, and a kid, and so that's what she was talking about, just like the raw corporate greed and power that had changed what was this weird wvibrant city, and even my own mom, she's like, when I was talking to her last week, she was like what did she say, she was like, oh, is that the gal who hates Nashville? And I'm like, Mom, that's not what's going on here. She loves Nashville. She loves Nashville the way we love Indianapolis. It's just that gentrification and corporate greed has changed the city, and it's kind of a funny remark because it's annoying to see all these bridal parties, and that's what she was talking about. And
well, I just was thinking about Johnny Cash, because back in the 60s and 70s, Johnny Cash hated Nashville. He hated all the, the lawyers and the agents, and it wasn't the Nashville of the 20s, the Carter family Nashville he married into that was this kind of weird, so even this has been going on for 60 years. So yeah, but it's still, however you explain it, it still didn't work to her benefit. I'm not criticizing her. Obviously I would have voted for Ben. These little sort of character issues, just so often people fall for them and vote based on them. And, and I think
how we saw this we worked together on the Nina Turner campaign in Cleveland, right? Where, a quote about NFL Joe Biden came back to hurt her big time, right? That she lost that campaign. We could have had a Nina Turner in Congress per that quote, right? Like, so what are you going to do? Keep your mouth shut, play it safe, or just keep on fighting? And I'm sure people can come back to this podcast if we ever run for office and be like, Mike Oles with Ruby Ridge is this and that. And it's like, that wasn't what I was saying. What I was saying is that, without progressive politics and a progressive solidarity-based politics, something will fill that void. Unfortunately, it was, racist, apocalyptic, BS Christianity. So, I
think a big part of this really is you can't win every race. And that was a tough district, as I said, and maybe she wasn't the ideal candidate. She had a few comments. I think this is an eminently, when I'm going to switch quickly to Maine, and I want to get your thoughts on, if we can do it, the Jasmine Crockett video, which I will, full disclosure right now, was not impressed by, but maybe you feel differently, and I certainly would give it a second thought. But I just want to talk about this. Graham Plattner versus Janet Mills. We have competing polls. Plattner is under a lot of attack because he has a tattoo that he claims, and I believe him, he did not know was Nazi inspired. It's some sort of, I don't know, eagle or something. I don't even know what it is, a hawk, whatever it is. I wouldn't have thought it was a Nazi. Oh, Death's Head. That's right. Totenkopf, Death Head. I wouldn't have thought it was a Nazi. I wouldn't have known that. He says he didn't know it. He was in the Navy or whatever. He got a tattoo. I believe that. And most people don't care, honestly. People care about affordability. He's talking about universal health care. People care about billions and billions going to imperialism. He's against it. Janet Mills is we talk about identity politics with Afton Ben, how the Republicans always use it. Janet Mills is best known, I think, for fighting Trump on his trans ban. Whatever you think about that, that is not a popular issue for Democrats. I'm not saying it's a huge issue or matters that much, but it isn't a one that's a winning issue necessarily. It's not affordability. Plattner seems to me much stronger in a general election. Polls are back and forth when it comes to who will win the Democratic primary. Your thoughts? I'll just leave it at that. Your thoughts?
Well, I'll say that I haven't followed the race close enough. I think, Susan Collins is sort of always like the hope that she can get beaten. I feel like it's like we're 20 years into this conversation. Like, we can only beat Susan Collins, right? We can have a chance at winning the Senate. And I don't know how this woman survives, Susan Collins, how she survives supporting Trump, George W. Bush, other wars, right? I don't know how. I don't understand how people may vote for this lady. So, first of all, good to Susan Collins for, holding on for a political career that should have ended long ago. I don't know enough about, the Plattner versus Mills race, but it just feels like Plattner's way ahead in the polls. Janet Mills, it seems like a good Democratic leader, but also probably way too old to be running. And we've seen, Chuck Schumer should retire. She should retire. Or let's just take it to the primary and see what happens then, because that's why we have primaries. And if the polls hold up and Plattner wins, we're right. If he doesn't, I guess the Schumer folks are right. But it's
I just don't want to see the Democratic primary voters make the wrong decision here. And yeah, there are a couple polls that show Plattner with a solid lead, but you can see this latest one from Pan Atlantic, actually, and I was surprised to see it has Mills up by 10 in the primary, but shows Plattner slightly better against Collins. The other polls show him much better against Collins. So I just don't want to see the Democratic primary voters make the wrong choice as they did in 2016, and as I strongly believe they did in 2020, even though in the end Biden did prevail against Trump. So I think it's important.
If I was the main, I'd be a Plattner voter about organizing for him. But it's a story where we fight. Like, who's the partner in the Democratic Party? Is the progressives? Are we the junior partner? Or are we the lead partner here? And so this will be a chance for us to show up and win a tough race in the primary if we have to.
Well, I was, when I worked with you at Our Revolution and you supervised me, I did work, Maine was one of my states, and I worked with one of the now members of the House there, and he's a big Plattner guy, so we're hoping
Grayson,
he can pull it out.
Yeah,
it's exciting. Well, I forget that guy's name now.
Jasmine Crockett, who I think is another one of our great success stories at Our Revolution, who Our Revolution endorsed as a state rep, and helped get her into elected politics.
She made her name when they had the freeze out, when the Democrats fled the state, as they often do in Texas, to prevent a vote on, I think it was redistricting then as well. I can't, but I may be wrong. Let's play this ad. This is Jasmine Crockett. Here she is. What do you think? I already telegraphed I'm not a big fan of this ad, but I'd like your thoughts.
How about this new one they have? Their new star, Crockett. How about her? She's the new star of the Democrat Party, Jasmine Crockett. They're in big trouble.
But you have this woman, Crockett. She's a very low IQ person.
I watched her speak the other day. She's definitely a low IQ person. Crockett. Oh, man. She's a very low IQ person.
Somebody said the other day she's one of the leaders of the party. I said, you got to be kidding.
Now they're going to rely on Crockett. Crockett's going to bring them back.
So what do you think about that, Mike? That's her lead ad, right? That's the important ad because it sort of kicks off her campaign.
Well, I'm a pretty big Jasmine Crockett fan, so I appreciate her willingness to spar and go deep, and I would be curious about what her relationship with Marjorie Taylor Greene is now. Like, did they make up after that? After she called her, what she call her, a bleach blonde Barbie, whatever. I forget the whole thing, right? But that was sort of the beginning of the end of Marjorie Taylor Greene as a and kind of maybe it was a wake up call for Marjorie about the way she was acting. But I don't know if that's the campaign that I would run because because Texas is a state that if we figure out Texas, we figure out a lot of our country's problems. But I am a huge Jasmine Crockett fan, and I think that she, is one of the rising stars in the Democratic Party for sure. I just,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
She comes out of our movement in some ways, right? I mean, she kind of gets,
she does.
Comes out of our progressive politics.
Oh, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there with that, Mike. I feel like you mentioned Texas. This is, I think, you talk about Susan Collins being kind of a Democratic white whale, like, we can just defeat her, we'll win. That's kind of like a Senate seat in a U.S. Senate seat in Texas.
Texas is like a Jupiter or something, like it's if you figure out Texas, it's game over for the Republican
I think
Party.
This was the wrong way to go. I'm just going to be real blunt. Trump is still going to be relatively popular in Texas. This ad gives him the every word. She doesn't get a word to say. She doesn't present her argument. So you're basically reinforcing, as I hear it, I think she needs to make the affordability case. She needs to show how I would get ordinary Texans in that ad talking about how, playing clips of Trump saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and how things have gotten worse and worse for ordinary Texans and what she's trying to do to change that. I think that would be far more effective than just presenting her face there and then turning to the camera. And, it's a conservative, relatively conservative state. I just don't, I think that was a real swing and a miss. So I'm being blunt here. I didn't know. I don't want to diss your girl or anything like that. And that's not the point, but I don't see this as the path the Democrats should be using to win. I think when you hear a Graham Plattner or a Mamdani talk about how they're going to fight to make life better for the people of their district, their city, their state, that goes a lot further.
Yeah, and maybe it's just one ad that they can bury, and the second ad will be much better. But I mean, look, in politics, I think you got to define who you are first, right, and not be defined by your opponent. And so maybe there's some marketing genius who thinks this is a great idea and it's going to work. But I think that at the end of the day, it's like, what is it? Like, how do we? If Jasmine Crockett is the lead on the ticket, how do we build that campaign that translates to pulling off, which would be the biggest victory, since Obama, right, in terms of Democratic politics, how do we, what does that formation look like in Texas? Because obviously the Senate candidate will lead the charge, but we have some good friends running for down ballot on that ticket, and so like Clayton running for Secretary of Agriculture, or whatever it's called,
Ag Commissioner. Yeah. So that's exciting about Clayton, and Crockett's running against Tallarico, who is, I believe, he is an evangelical, but he calls himself a progressive evangelical. The thing that troubles me about that ad is that it will certainly activate the left base in the Texas Democratic Party, and they're going to be like, good, she's a fighter, we want her. But again, you may win the primary, but you'll lose, I believe, the war, or you're making it harder to win the war. Also, I don't want to be here dissing Crockett. You said you like her a lot, which goes very far for me. I was looking up some of her policies. A lot of people on the left are upset with her. Progressives are upset with her because she hasn't broken with Israel. She hasn't been the worst. She's voted on occasion against funding a certain weapon system for Israel, but she hasn't done that consistently. She has defended Israel's right to exist, as she would put it, not the way Mamdani has, where he says, yeah, they have a right to exist as a truly democratic state where everyone has equal rights. She doesn't say that. So I have issues with that. On the other hand, she is a Medicare for All co-sponsor. She has been pretty far to the left on a lot of issues. I know Senator Nina Turner likes her. So, I would vote for her for sure, certainly in a general election. I'm not sure she would be my choice in the primary. This is not to diss her. It's just say, hey, let's be smart in our ads. Let's figure out how we can appeal to the centrists, how we can even appeal to those on the right who are really fed up with the ever more difficult challenges facing Americans.
Now, is there any recent polls? I haven't seen the polls, but
I'll look it up real quick, Mike, and then maybe we'll wrap this up. It's always great talking to you, whether in person, whether doing a event or on the phone or this way, video. Let me see if I can find it. Real Clear Polling, which by the way is a little bit squirrely because they don't put every poll. For example, they have only the pro Janet Mills polls up, but not the ones that have Plattner looking good. Here, the two latest polls I'm seeing for what they're worth, and I'll put them on screen for everybody because I think people will be interested, Mike, is showing Crockett with a lead, but a somewhat smaller lead according to the more recent poll, the Texas State University. I believe that's what TSU stands for. I may be wrong. They have her up by 8 over Tallarico. Let's see if we can get this on screen. I think you can see that. The University of Houston poll back in September had her up by 18. A more recent poll has her up by 8. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's something to give up a guaranteed seat in Congress for a state, a Senate run that probably has less than a 30% chance of winning, right? So it's, I mean, if I was in her seat, I would stay in Congress. I just would, continue to develop my, my work in Congress. But I'm hoping it works out for whoever wins Texas because, again, this would be a huge day if a year from now we're celebrating Christmas 2026 or end of the year 2026 and we are basking in this new era of American politics.
Well, it'd be certainly very exciting. And can you imagine having a black woman as a senator from Texas would really be an exciting development. And I think one that many of us would celebrate. I certainly would. I, as you indicate, does not appear to be the likeliest outcome, but it certainly is a possible one at this point. Mike Oles, thank you so much for joining us. Any final word? I'll give you, as I always do, all my guests get one final word before we call it a show.
No, just Hal, just thanks for doing this show. Keep it going. I know it's a lot of work and not always glorious, but thank you for just keeping the beat going every day. So thanks again.
Well, I really appreciate your support. You've been a supporter of my doing this, and I appreciate it. And people say, "Oh, it's hard, this or that." It is. I love doing this. This is what I want to do, and I feel incredibly privileged that I can, that I have the opportunity to do this without having to worry about putting food on my family. Because if I had to put food on my family, there wouldn't be a lot of food on them from doing this podcast, or there'd be less food than there'd be without the podcast, I fear. Mike Oles, thank you so much. We'll have you back whenever you like. And I, Hal Ginsberg, will be back tomorrow. It will be an Arlen Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much for being part of Halitics.
Great.